good to see you guys. So what I wanted to do, which is different from my normal video, I wanted to do a state-by-state battle, a comparison between two states. So this one's going to be Oregon versus Arizona, and this is going to be quantitative. Okay, so it's not qualitative. We're not going to go over the fact that you hate the rain and you love the sunshine, or you hate the heat and you want to be able to wear sweaters, right? So we're not going into that stuff. We're just going to stick with quantitative stuff, things like cost of housing, cost of gas, education, and some of those things. Okay, so things that are very general. So there's a couple things I would say too. Anytime you make a video like this, like, you have to pull data from sources, right? And so you got to go through and try and pick the best sources. And so I tried to do that to the best I could. But remember, all data and statistics, it always changes, right? I tried to be as fair as I could with the data here, and you'll see that there was a couple spots where I made adjustments because I felt like the data was off. The other thing too is, like I said, data changes, right? So what's true today may not be true in a year. And then lastly, these are generalizations. So these are broad generalizations. So like if I say living in Oregon versus Arizona, it's like, okay, well, where? Right? Are we comparing Scottsdale, Arizona with Roseburg, Oregon? Like, that wouldn't be fair, right? Or are we going to compare Lake Oswego, Oregon with Globe, Arizona? That wouldn't be fair. We can't do Flagstaff versus Bend, right? Like, even though that might be more fair than the other examples. So these are just like broad generalizations. And so you'll be able to see that in each one of these generalizations, you're going to have to apply it to your own situation a little bit. You can look up your own power bill, see how much your electricity costs are, right? And then you can get an estimate for how much electricity costs are in the specific city in Arizona you're moving to. Some cities are colder in Arizona. Some cities are hotter, right? Phoenix is a lot warmer than, say, Show Low or Pine Top, right? So you're going to have a higher electrical bill in the summertime in Phoenix, right? For all the AC. So anyway, all that to say, you just kind of have to take all of this stuff without getting too complicated or too in the weeds. So we have to make some assumptions. This is going to be an assumption for a family of 4, and it's going to be an assumption for, I would say, an average person who's a W-2 wage earner. Okay, so that's kind of the assumptions that we're making. So I break this down into housing, energy, transportation, food, education, and taxes. Those are the things we're going to look at, and then we're going to compare and add up the costs or the savings of all of those in Arizona versus Oregon, and then see where we come out in the end. So let's dive right in. So the first one we're going to look at is going to be housing. I'm going to pull up Nerd Wallet here, and so they've got housing costs being 37% higher in Oregon versus Arizona, which that seems a little bit high, but I do think that that's possible. So for rentals, it's $19.96 for a 2-bedroom apartment in Phoenix and $25.65 in Portland. That's probably pretty close. I think that sounds about right. And then if you wanted to buy something, they have $459 for a median home price for a 3-2 in Arizona, and then they have $651 for a median home price for a 3-2 in Portland. Well, that seemed a little high to me. Not everybody lives in Portland. So what I did is I went ahead and looked at statewide. What's the median? And that gave me $510 for Oregon and $443 for Arizona. So I adjusted that one. So I adjusted that a little bit, and then that gives me the mortgage rate of $3,400 a month in Oregon versus $3,040 a month in Arizona. So owning on average, generalized, is $444 cheaper in Arizona. Renting is $569. Took the average of the two, that puts us at $506 a month saving. Arizona wins this one. All right, let's go take a look at energy and utilities. Okay, so electricity is actually cheaper in Oregon than it is in Arizona. I didn't know that. I'm not super surprised. I know that Oregon does have Bonneville. They provide quite a bit of power on the Columbia River. I know Arizona has some of that as well, but anyway, it all comes down to about 1 cent per kilowatt hour cheaper, with Oregon at 13 cents, Arizona at 14 cents per kilowatt hour. But that's such a small part of everybody's monthly utilities, their power bill. So I decided I'd pull up something that does a better job bundling everything together. Pulled this up from Forbes. So Forbes had just a bundled monthly utility cost breakdown by state. I thought that was cool. So we looked at Arizona and we got 460, and that includes your streaming, your phone bill, your natural gas, your internet, water, and power bill. Okay, so Arizona was 460, Oregon 407. So then that puts us at savings in Oregon of $53 a month for a typical family and in a typical home. All right, so the next thing I wanted to look at was gas. Okay, so gas, getting around. There's not really a lot of options for public transportation in Phoenix. It's a very spread out city, so I'm just focusing on gas here. But Arizona wins by $9 a month. Well, where did that come from, or what's that about? Let me show you. So I just pulled up Gas Buddy's average gas price comparison, and you can see Arizona and Oregon right next to each other. Okay, so it's about 18 cents different, and you can see the whole West Coast here is higher than everywhere else, even Utah. There's a savings of $9 a month if you're buying gas in Arizona versus buying gas generally in Oregon. I went out to eastern Arizona and gas was $1 cheaper. So it was literally $1 cheaper out in eastern Arizona than it was in the valley. What I've heard, and this is something that would have to be verified, but I've heard that the EPA has required the state of Arizona in the metro area to use a gasoline that produces less emissions. So I haven't verified that, but that's sort of the theory circulating in the realtor circles about why gas is what it is in Arizona and why it's gone up. But it's gone up everywhere. I think everybody's complaining about it. But $9 a month savings. There you go. Okay, next one, food. This one surprised me. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into that one. So the first thing that I found here for food is the average cost for groceries per person in Portland. It's kind of fuzzy. $375. Arizona was $302. So that's the main source of the savings here. If you're a family of 4, multiply it times 4, you're going to be spending $1,500 a month in Oregon and $1,212 a month in Arizona. So that's a savings of $288 a month for a household. If your family is going to go out to eat 3 times a month, eating out in Arizona is actually more expensive. It was $2 more per meal, which I thought was crazy because I know waiters in Oregon make more. But that ended up meaning a $24 savings eating out in Oregon versus Arizona. So that equals out to an Arizona win by $264 a month. Pretty interesting. Not what I would have expected, and that's always fun when you do this kind of research, that some of your assumptions get blown out of the water. Okay, the second to last thing we're going to look at is taxes. Okay, so the assumption here is, W-2 earners making, maybe 2 people making $100,000 a year, so 2 people each making $50,000 a piece. What you're going to see is that Arizona has a really low income tax, but they have a sales tax. Oregon has a higher income tax, but no sales tax, right? So when you take all of that and you equal it all out, you have to figure out, okay, well, what's the taxable load? We'll talk about that here in a second, but let's break this down real quick. So here's Oregon state income tax table. So this right here shows you that in Oregon, if you are earning over $9,450, you're going to pay an 8.75 tax rate on that. Okay, And then you compare that to Arizona's, and if you're making over $28,000, you're going to pay a 2.9%. Now, here's one thing. Arizona just passed a flat tax rule. So in Arizona, starting this year, it's 2.5% across the board, which means that people both earning below and above $28,000 a year are going to get a little bit of a tax break. It's not much, but it sure makes your taxes easier when you know that it's 2.5% flat tax. So, and then let's break down the sales tax stuff, though. That's kind of interesting, right? And so if you take a look at the sales tax in Arizona, which there is not one in Oregon, you've got a 5.6% state tax rate, plus local surtaxes bumps it up to 8.17 on average. There are some cities that have no extra tax. There's some counties and there's 0 extra taxes, and then there's some that are almost all the way up to like 10%. So it kind of depends. So if you shop in Mesa versus Apache Junction versus Scottsdale, you pay a slightly different tax rate in each city. So it's pretty interesting, but again, Oregon has 0 there. So then you have to say, okay, well then we're looking at that. What about property tax? What about excise taxes and corporate taxes and all that other stuff, right? Well, it gets real confusing. So that's where I like to go to the Tax Foundation. They've done a really good job figuring out, okay, well, what's the taxable load? Like, what's the overall load, all things consistent for Arizona, Oregon, California, or whatever. So they've got Oregon coming in at a taxable load of 10.8%, and then they've got Arizona coming in at 9.5%. So you can see here that the taxable burden in Arizona wins with a 1.3% less taxable burden, which is about $1,300 on $100,000 of income, which equals out to $108 a month. Okay, so there's another win for Arizona. Good job, Arizona. Next thing I wanted to talk about was education, and this is going to be private education specifically. So this is going to probably apply to maybe 20% of you guys, 10% of you guys. But if you have kids in school and you want to send your kids to private school or homeschool them, you have to take this into account, because this could potentially be a huge money saving thing for you and your family. Okay, so Arizona started something last year called, or maybe it was a year and a half, last year it was passed, called the ESA. So it's the Empowerment Scholarship Account, and it's anywhere from $6,000 to $9,000 a month that can be sent to a kid who decides to opt out of public education. So if you are a family, everybody pays, when you pay your sales tax in Arizona, everybody's paying into the public education system, right? But what happens if you don't send your kid to public education? Do you still pay into it? Yes. But luckily in Arizona, you get to use some of that money for whatever education you choose to send your child to. So in Oregon, you can't do this. So in Oregon, there's nothing like this. If you want to send your kid to a private school in Oregon, say it's $10,000 a year, you pay all your taxes. You pay all of the taxes you should pay for their public schooling, and then you also pay the $10,000 a year on top of that. So you actually pay for 2 schools, okay? So in Arizona, you get a little bit of a discount. So the average cost, I want to say the average cost to educate students in the Arizona schools is somewhere around $10,000 to $12,000 a student, but they're going to give you up to around $7,000 per kid if you want to send your kid to private school. So if you're sending your kid and their private school is $10,000, you get $7,000 of that paid for by the state as basically like a rebate, right? And so that's super helpful. And if you're a family of 1, that's $583 a month. That's fantastic. If you're a family of 5, do the math. I mean, you're almost up to $3,000 a month. Like, how awesome is that? So I find that is a huge incentive. I'm not going to include that in my end result because it's such a small percentage of people that are going to benefit from the ESA, but it's something that if you are interested in sending your kid to a private school and you want to get them out of public schools, which I was a public school teacher. I spent over a decade in the public schools, and man, I could just tell you, every teacher and every pre-service teacher, they all believe education is broken, but no one can seem to fix it. It has failed our students, it has caused depression, and I want to see this everywhere. So I just want to encourage you guys, factor this in if you're looking at sending your kids to private school. So add this to our final results. So speaking of final results, let's go take a look at those. Where are we at? So Oregon versus Arizona. Quantitatively, Arizona comes out way ahead, right? So for housing, $566 that you save in Arizona. Energy, Oregon wins that one. You save $53 in Oregon. For gas, you save $9 in Arizona. For food, you save $264 in Arizona. For taxes, you save $108 in Arizona. And that equals out to an overall savings per month of $940 every month that you potentially could be saving moving to Arizona versus Oregon. And multiply that times 12, you get $11,200 per year. So hopefully this video was helpful. If there's any properties that you want to take a look at in Arizona, that's where I'm licensed. Obviously, I want you to move to Arizona, but it has to work for you. You can take a look at all the resources that I've pulled up. Go to NerdWallet, check out Gas Buddy, check out move.org. There's all these different websites that will help you make the best financial decisions for your family. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.